Hey everyone, welcome back to Dragonfly Projects and Homestead. My name is Alex, and this is my red pine tree plantation. I love it. This plantation is give or take 12 to 13 years old. It's man-made. It's a plantation. That means people came and planted the trees, or machines. I am not sure. And this is the first time that I'm actually going through the plantation to see what the health of the plantation looks like. There are some guidelines on how to properly maintain a plantation, and I want to make sure I take some measurements and I check what kind of spacing they use to plant it to see what kind of health and what kind of upkeep I'll have to do for the plantation, and if that's coming up soon or not. So let's go in there and let's figure out where we're at with the plantation. Whew. Tight spot in here. So you will notice that I am now just a couple trees inside of the plantation, and all the bottom branches are dead and there's no more leaves on them. Well, not leaves, the needles. As I mentioned previously in another video, basically conifers, when the branch has a negative intake or requires more energy to be kept alive than it's producing with photosynthesis, what it does is it just cuts off the axis. So that branch will die and it will concentrate its effort towards the branches that bring in energy. So in this case, because the trees are so densely planted and so close together, the bottom branches will start dying, and it's the same thing throughout as far as you can see. Now, according to the Ontario government, where I'm located, the ideal soil for red pines is loamy soil. So more sandy and well draining, which this area is exactly that. It's mostly sand, well draining, and it's very loamy. So red pine plantations are very, 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 very common in my area because it is a tree that thrives in our environment. Now, the government says the ideal spacing for a plantation is 8 feet by 8 feet, or 2.4 meters by 2.4 meters. Now, I was fairly curious, so I brought a measuring tape because I am fairly certain that these trees are way closer together than that. And the other thing I find interesting is, if you look from up above, it's not a nice, planted in nice rows. It seems like there's a lot of disparity, gaps, and different layouts, which surprises me. So this specific one, check from trunk to trunk, we have, this is 6.5 feet in between trees, and let's check what it says in between rows. Seven and a half feet in between rows and 6.5 feet in between the trees in the same row. I will check a couple other ones just to see. I have a feeling it'll be very, very similar. Yeah, 6.5 feet. So we have 6.5 feet between trees and 7.5 feet between rows, which means this was planted in not ideal conditions. So usually that means we will have to do a first thinning faster because the trees will stop thriving because they're so packed together and they're all competing for the same resources. Now, according to your spacing, the government does provide a chart that tells you how big the trees should be before your first thinning. The smallest spacing that it suggests is 8 feet by 6 feet, which is the closest to what I have, so I'll use that value as my reference. It says that the average tree at chest height should be 14 centimeters in diameter. That means 44 centimeters circumference, so around the tree. So I have my trusty measuring tape here. That's centimeters. See how big this is. So actually this tree is at 52. So this tree is one of the bigger ones from the plantation. So the average tree at chest height needs to be at least 44 centimeters before the first thinning. So technically, if I was to go around, I need to check a couple more but I feel like we are very close to that time where we're ready to do our first thinning for the red pine plantation. I have gone around and measured a couple more trees, measured 10 in total. The smallest one I found was 28 centimeters, and the biggest one I found was indeed the one I measured on camera at 52, 53 centimeters. So that means we are getting very close to the first thinning. What does the first thinning entail? Basically, every fourth row or every third row, depending, you're going to cut the whole row. So these are planted in rows going that way. I forget how many rows there are, but there is, give or take, 10,000 trees in this 2.5 acre plot. So what you're going to do is find a row that does not seem to be thriving, cut every single tree in that row, then leave 2 rows of trees, and then the row after that again, cut every single tree in that row. So what that allows is the trees have sunlight on the sides to grow taller. The other thing you want to watch out for is you don't want moisture to be trapped. So the less air, the less wind that can go through the branches, the more moisture is trapped. More moisture means mushrooms, diseases can set in. And because this is, for the most part, just red pine, so a monoculture, if one gets a disease, the chances of every tree getting the disease are fairly high, and then you would lose the whole plantation. So it seems by the calculations and the age of the plantation, usually they say after 20 to 25 years is your first thinning when you're doing 8x8 spacing, because the trees are closer together. They don't grow as fast, they don't grow as tall. So I'll have to cut them faster so that they don't die and start having problems, diseases. You can see some of them are not doing so well. There's also other invasive species that have started to grow in there. There is some beech, there is some birch in there that started growing, that we want to make sure that they don't compete for the nutrients and the sunlight that we want our red pine to grow for. Now the thing we have to remember, and sometimes people get a little offended that you would plant so many nice trees and then just end up cutting them. Remember that this used to be a big wide open field, and the gold, whew, that's cold. And the goal in the end was always to cut down those trees. Usually they're used for lumber, dimensional lumber, so your typical 2x4s, 2x6s, 4x4s you're using, because pine grows fast, grows straight, and it's cheap to grow it. So it makes for great building material lumber. If we were to keep this plantation as it is and just let it be, eventually every single tree would die. And we'd have what we call dead standing. So dead trees just standing around, waiting for freezing rain, strong gusts of winds, or anything of that sort for it to fall on somebody and hurt somebody or damage things. So these plantations have to be thinned. They have to be cut down. And after 50 years or so, you cut down every single tree, you finish harvesting every single tree, and that is where you start replanting. So in a way, it is tree farming. Or I could say I'm a tree shepherd. I am taking care of my flock. Just so happens that in this case, my flock are red pines. And you can see sometimes there are pockets where the trees are not doing well. It could be for different reasons. Maybe the soil is different here. Maybe something came through and damaged trees. I know in this case, you can see a lot of trees got damaged with the big winds and the big snows. We had a lot of freezing rain. You can see some of the smaller trees suffered with the heavy snow. Right now it's heavy snow, it's wet, just bends everything. There's some invasive species getting in there. For some reason, I think some oak was planted by mistake. A tree like this will probably survive, but it won't be as good. So that tree will probably have to be cut down sooner rather than later. So it is important to take good care of the trees in your plantation. and you want to make sure that you keep the healthy trees. For example, big, nice, straight tree, perfect for some lumber, versus this one that's split and now has codominant heads or two leaders competing. Ideally, if I had caught that earlier, cut off one leader and have one central leader only. So now that tree would be undesirable for lumber. Still great for stuff like heating your house, which I will end up using this wood to heat the house and or maple syrup. And I can see some places here where for sure it was planted tighter and more compact than the 6x6.5 and 7.5 that I measured. So these trees are all competing against each other. So a thinning in the next 2-3 years will definitely help open up the plantation and make life for the trees a lot easier. Do you have a tree plantation on your property? Do you guys agree or disagree with what I've shared with you? Are the guidelines different in your area? So I know for Ontario it's a little different. Not every place is the same. We use a lot of softwood, conifers, red pine. There is also some white pine available. It likes to grow tall, but it's very gnarly wood with lots of knots, and it likes to grow everywhere except straight. The idea also of a plantation is you plant them packed together. It forces them to go up because they're competing for sunlight. So it encourages them to grow straight, which is what you want when you're trying to harvest it for lumber. In this case, I'm hoping I'll be able to manage, properly maintain this plantation throughout my life, because I highly doubt I will. I might plant it one more time, but this will be mostly for my kids. I will harvest it, do the best I can, be a good shepherd of this plantation, use the wood for our own projects at home. I highly doubt I'll ever sell this wood, although, knock on wood. What I might start doing is for the next year or the year after, find the rows that are very sick and start cutting them. I estimate I'll have to cut down approximately 3,000 trees, which is a heck of a lot of trees. That is a lot of wood to process. I will use the trunks for either lumber if it's big enough, or just wood for a heat source. And all the branches, ideally I would like to mulch them or chip them to use as wood chips for either the walking path, for compost, or for the garden. At the end of the day, I'm trying to do my best to try and maintain the property. Deer love to walk through here. It's home to a lot of little critters. As you saw, what you see during the winter is no different than during the summer. There is no really weeds or plants or shrubs or anything of that nature that grows here, because there is just no sunlight reaching the floor. So these things are nice, but they're not necessarily good for the environment. If you're trying to have a thriving forest, you want diversity, you want the good species. You don't want monocultures in case something comes through with diseases or bugs and kills the whole area. You want good airflow. Also, different plants, different trees use different nutrients, so it keeps the soil well generated, well balanced, while these trees will use all of the same nutrients and leave behind what they're not using. So the next plantation after this would probably not be red pines. You'd probably have to rotate through something. And it is important to cut them down, because otherwise they will die, they will become hazardous, and that's when it becomes dangerous. I hope this was informative for you guys. If you have access to resources and you have some property available, I know in my county there are subsidies to plant a plantation. You have to sign an agreement with the county saying you will maintain and not touch the trees for at least 15 years, which is what we're coming up to, so I can do my first thinning in about 2-3 years. It is very, very cheap. Last I checked, I want to say it was about 45 cents a tree, subsidized, planted in the ground. So I know it's a lot of money if there's 10,000 trees, but you get to harvest literally your own wood eventually, and you get to enjoy all of this. I don't know if you guys can hear the snowmobiles. Man, people are flying down those trails. It's scary. Spring is right around the corner, so hopefully no more snowmobiles for this season. I don't know if you can also hear it, but you can hear the water and the snow melting and it's dripping down. Means maple syrup season. I just received my barrel stove kit, so I can have a makeshift evaporator for this year where I can use wood to boil that maple sap and not have to rely on propane, which was quite expensive. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, by all means leave them down below. I try to respond to everybody. I for sure read every comment right now. If you like this content, like and subscribe. I will for sure keep you guys in the loop once I start thinning this property. There is also animals walking through here. I know there's some moose. We saw the prints last year. Claudia saw one from far away. I didn't, unfortunately, but I have a trail cam this year. Hopefully I'll be able to capture some footage, and I'll get to share that with you once that happens. We just saw the massive piles of poop, of moose poop, and holy moly, they're large animals because that's a large pile of poop. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe. It helps us a ton, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much. Take care.